Our next speaker tonight is a really talented silversmith and jeweller, and her name is Shannon McShane.
Okay, so I'm a silversmith jeweller, but on the 5th of May I travelled to Dublin to hear Naomi Klein talk about her latest book, This Changes Everything. It was very eye-opening to read the whole book, and she talked about the latest things that are happening within, even just in Ireland, within climate change. But she signed my book and she said, stay brave. So it was like very poignant for me. This is like one of my most recent pieces. So within my practice, I explore the notion of preciousness through the combination of precious metal and found objects. These man-made objects are usually discarded or just tossed into the ocean, regardless of the environmental impact. So using the combination of different silversmithing techniques, I'm creating this idea of them being precious by keeping them inside the vessel. This is a piece that is a catalyst for my new body of work. So it's called Home, and it was a reaction to a brief called Confrontation. At the time, I'd recently read the article from the US military stating that climate change is the biggest threat to national security, which is a stance they still maintain. And my intention with this piece was to highlight the preciousness of our home, and using a piece of carved peat, it was the idea that it represented home in Ireland and keeping it precious. So it was kind of like a brave step for my new work. This is now the inspiration for the newest body of work, which I've just got funding for. So it's called Turning the Tide, and it's basically the idea to create work that becomes like visual activism. So it's the idea that I'm communicating that we need to stand up and take recognition for climate change and our pollution that we are doing to the environment, which I think as an artist is something I need to do, because in everyday life I just sit and make beautiful pieces and it's not really communicating that kind of intention. So it was mainly the catalyst of like going to the beach this summer, and I was looking around and people are throwing away like deodorant cans, a cooler actually, which I couldn't believe, because it was just like, why can't you just take that home and give it a good wash and use it again? But it's just the idea that everyone's just dallying around, throwing ice cream cups, throwing cans about, and there's no regard for the environment, the wildlife. So it's the idea that I want to communicate to people that we actually need to take steps to actually prevent this from happening. There's a group called Take 3 for the Sea, and they actively promote folk that are bravely walking around and just picking up rubbish. And their stance is that go to the beach, enjoy it, but take your stuff with you, but also take some of the rubbish that others leave behind. This is actually in Bangor, where I'm from, and they threw a bin, littering the ocean. Like, how bad can it be that you actually throw the bin in? So it's just this idea that folk aren't really paying attention to what's going on around us, and we're not really thinking about the bigger picture and standing up and making ourselves and our governments accountable for climate change and pollution. So for my work, it's like this idea that we're going to actually communicate between the wearer and the viewer, and the conversation's going to happen where the person who's wearing the piece will stand and go, well, actually, this is what we need to pay attention to, and hopefully create some form of activism. This is one of the Dakota pipeline activists, which is quite recent in the news. They've been actually fighting for quite some time, actually, and in Naomi Klein's book, she highlights quite a lot on these folk because she's actually a Canadian author. And it's like your polar bear fellow here, it's basically we are going to this point where we're not taking responsibility for what we're doing, and nor are our governments, and we're basically going to end up like the polar bear in a canoe out paddling in the Atlantic, basically like Kevin Costner in Waterworld. And even with the polar ice caps, I recently watched Leonardo DiCaprio's documentary There Before the Flood, and they're predicting that by 2040 the polar ice caps will no longer exist. So with my work, it's like taking this braver stance, as coming from where my work was much more nostalgia, storytelling, to actually being an activist within my work. At home, we've had folk who normally wouldn't even say boo to a ghost, or even much as stand in front of Stormont and saying, hey, we're not allowed to frack. These folks were even arrested for standing up and fighting for our fresh water supply up at the Woodburn Forest, which is a very brave thing to do, and it's something you've got to admire, that they took off work and decided to go up and do this. And I think for everyone, like, we need to actually start reevaluating what we're doing, and, you know, do we need to recycle more? Is it that we tell someone not to litter? Is it that we do walk along the beach or through the countryside picking up rubbish? Or do we do like these folks had to do down at, this is off Mayo, Shell have been trying to drill for oil, and there's been massive protests since 1997, I think. These folk are standing there in their wetsuits beside a massive, huge lorry, putting their lives at risk to protest this happening. You don't have to go as far as that. It's incredibly brave, but some people would say it's stupid. But if we don't stand up and take a stance, then we're just going to end up losing our environment, and eventually the planet, as they do say, it's going to go into an ice age before the flood. Like this lady here, it's another take three for the sea. You don't have to go out in a wee raft and pick up bits and pieces, but just having enough bravery to walk along the beach and not feel silly, just picking up the rubbish, putting it in a bag, and not feeling like people are watching you and laughing. Just put that out of your head and just, you know, become an activist in such small manners as that. This is another piece that I found on the beach. I don't really understand how that got there, but if you do see something like that, just pick it up and take it home. Like, be brave to do that. Yeah, so it's just the point of my work now is to become active and be an activist, and everyone can do that in a small manner or form, which is even just making sure you recycle, making sure you pick up your rubbish, and calling other people accountable for doing that. So thanks very much.